Ibrahim Traoré paid off $4.79 billion debt. Without Western aid, Africa's financial revolution, the world blinked in disbelief. Headlines screamed across the globe. Burkina Faso pays off $479 billion national debt without Western financial aid. To some, it sounded impossible. To others, it sounded dangerous. And to millions of Africans, it sounded like freedom. This wasn't just an economic move. It was a political earthquake. For decades, Africa had been told that without the World Bank, the IMF, or foreign aid, it could never survive. But now, one of the continent's youngest leaders had shattered that illusion. Ibrahim Traoré, a man born not in the halls of global power, but in the dusty villages of Burkina Faso, had done what few dared even to imagine. He cut the chains of financial dependency, and almost instantly the world took notice. Some cheered, some panicked, others began plotting their response. Because make no mistake, when a leader refuses to play by the rules written in Western boardrooms, history shows there's always a price to pay. But here's the question no one can ignore. Did this decision set Burkina Faso free, or did it place a target squarely on Traoré's back? Before we dive in, I want you to do something. Type the name of your city in the comments right now. Let the world see that this story isn't just about Burkina Faso, it's about all of us. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe, like, and share this video so the message spreads further than the headlines ever will. Because over the next few minutes, you'll discover why this wasn't just about billions of dollars. It was about sovereignty, resistance, and the rebirth of a continent that has been underestimated for far too long. This is not just Traoré's story. This is Africa's story. And by the end, you'll have to ask yourself a powerful question. What does it mean to stand when the world demands you kneel? Burkina Faso, a small, landlocked nation in the heart of West Africa. To outsiders, it's often dismissed, forgotten, or misunderstood. But for those who call it home, it is a land of resilience, of long traditions, of a people who have endured centuries of storms and still refuse to break. Yet behind its rich culture lies a brutal history. For decades, colonial rule drained its resources, gold, cotton, land, all flowing outward while poverty stayed behind. When independence finally arrived, it carried hope. But also a new kind of trap: debt. The promise of aid and loans came dressed as support, but hidden in the fine print were chains stronger than any army. Debt was not just financial, it was political. It dictated policies, crippled economies, and kept African nations dependent. By the time Ibrahim Traoré rose to power, Burkina Faso was drowning. $4.79 billion hung over its head, not just as a number, but as the silent weight suffocating farmers, teachers, and children alike. Fields were harvested, but profits fled abroad. Schools opened but had no resources. Hospitals treated the sick but lacked medicine. And yet from this suffocation, something unexpected was rising. Traoré, a soldier turned leader, was not like the others before him. He was young. He was bold, and he was unafraid of the questions others dared not ask. Why must Africa always borrow from those who once enslaved it? Why must Burkina Faso's future be written in the contracts of Western bankers? Why should sovereignty exist only on paper, not in reality? The people saw his fire and they believed, but the path he was about to walk was perilous. To reject the system was to challenge centuries of control. And history had shown, leaders who defied the order rarely lived long. Still, Traoré stood firm. And soon, the storm began. For decades, the story had always been the same. African nations drowning in debt, begging for relief, only to sign contracts that tied them even tighter to their creditors. Each time, promises were made, promises of development, of partnerships, of support. But each time the wealth flowed outward while the burden stayed behind. Ibrahim Traoré refused to play this game. He began asking the questions no one wanted asked. Why should Burkina Faso's gold fund foreign treasuries, while its own people struggled? Why should cotton harvested by Burkinabe hands enrich European companies, leaving farmers poor? Why should the wealth beneath African soil never benefit those who lived above it? The more he spoke, the louder the backlash grew. Western media branded him reckless, unstable, dangerous. They warned investors to stay away. They painted him as a populist threat who would lead Burkina Faso into chaos. But in the streets, the people heard something else. They heard the voice of dignity. Behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Advisors warned of sanctions, coups, even assassination attempts. History was filled with examples. Patrice Lumumba, silenced in Congo. Thomas Sankara, betrayed in Burkina Faso itself. Muammar Gaddafi, bombed in Libya. Africa's heroes rarely lived long. But Traoré would not bend. Instead of begging for loans, he turned inward. He restructured trade deals to keep profits at home. He redirected spending from foreign contractors to local businesses. He demanded that Burkina Faso's gold revenues remain in Burkina Faso. The first months were brutal. Inflation surged. Critics said his policies were reckless. Rumors spread that his government would collapse. But then slowly the tide shifted. Debt repayments were slashed. National reserves began to rise. Local industries strengthened. And then the announcement shook the world. Burkina Faso had paid off $4.79 billion in national debt, without a cent of Western aid. In Ouagadougou, fireworks lit the sky. Families embraced in the streets. Farmers poured into the capital with drums and songs. Children waved flags chanting, "We are free." For the first time in decades, Burkina Faso felt unchained. But outside Africa, panic spread. Western governments convened emergency meetings. Financial institutions whispered of punishments to come. Editorials warned of dangerous nationalism. Because what Traoré had done was bigger than numbers. It was proof. Proof that Africa could survive without the lifelines designed to keep it bound. Proof that debt could be broken, and sovereignty could be real. And for those who had built their empires on African dependency, that proof was dangerous. Very dangerous. The question now loomed over the world. Would Burkina Faso be allowed to stand, or would the hammer of global power strike down once again? The celebration didn't last long. Within days, threats poured in. Aid was suspended. Sanctions were whispered. International envoys arrived, urging Traoré to reconsider, to cooperate, to accept the same old terms that had enslaved the nation for decades. But Burkina Faso did not back down. Instead, its people poured into the streets, farmers, mothers, students, soldiers, tens of thousands forming a living shield around their leader. Flags waved, chants thundered through Ouagadougou. The air shook with a single cry. Burkina Faso will not kneel. What followed was unlike anything the world had seen. The crowds didn't riot. They didn't burn. Instead, they sat, tens of thousands dropping to the ground in unison. Mothers raised their children above them. Students lifted their fists. Soldiers sat alongside civilians. It was silence, louder than any war drum. Cameras broadcasted the images worldwide. And in that silence, one truth rang clear. If Traoré was wanted, then so too were the millions who stood with him. Western media scrambled to spin the story. They called it instability, chaos, a threat to democracy. But the images told a different truth. They told the story of a nation that had chosen dignity over fear. The world now faced a dilemma. To punish Burkina Faso meant punishing millions of people united in peace. To arrest Traoré was to spark a fire across Africa. And in that moment, the balance shifted. The warrant of doubt had become a badge of honor. What was meant to isolate Traoré had sanctified him instead. And in that unshakable silence, the world saw a reality it could not erase. The chains had been broken. Burkina Faso had done the unthinkable. The debt was gone. The chains were broken. And across Africa, a fire was spreading. Murals of Traoré appeared in cities from Lagos to Nairobi. Hashtags like #Africa Unchained swept across social media. Diaspora communities rallied in New York, Paris, and London, carrying signs that read, "If Burkina Faso can be free, so can we." For Western powers, the humiliation was deep. Their warrant, their warnings, their threats, none of it had worked. Instead of fear, they had ignited resistance. Instead of silence, they had created unity. Traoré himself became more than a president. He became a symbol, to some flawed, to others controversial, but to all who had witnessed it, he was proof that resistance had power, that debt, exploitation, and dependency were not destiny. And as the people celebrated, the question echoed across Africa. If one small nation could stand, what was stopping the rest? This was never just about Burkina Faso. It was about centuries of injustice finally being confronted, about sovereignty made real, about unity proving stronger than fear. And now the story turns to you. What does this moment mean in your city, in your life? Type your city name in the comments. Let the world see that this story is bigger than borders. And if you believe Africa's story must be heard, subscribe, like, and share this video, because the more we speak, the less they can silence us. Burkina Faso was supposed to break under $479 billion of debt. Instead, it broke the silence of an entire continent. The backfire is complete. The chains are exposed, and the question remains, who will rise next?